Dr. Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, staring at the holographic contract hovering before him. The Excelthians were offering him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a direct neural link with an alien mind. No human had ever attempted it before. The experiment was meant to be a scientific exchange, a way for both species to understand each other on a deeper level. But Elias had other plans. He tapped his fingers on the metal table, glancing at the two Excelthian officials seated across from him. Their elongated, gray-skinned faces were unreadable, their black eyes devoid of emotion. He had spent years studying their species, and if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that they lacked a fundamental human trait: humor. Excelthians were logical, methodical, and completely uninterested in anything that did not serve a direct purpose. They saw emotions as inefficient distractions. Laughter. To them, it was an evolutionary mistake. Elias smirked. Just to be clear, you want to see how human cognition functions in real time. Full mental synchronization. Yes, one of the officials replied, his voice smooth and calculated. We have studied your species for decades, but your minds remain unpredictable. Our goal is to observe, analyze, and document the differences in neural processing. The subject of your link will be Varzik, one of our most accomplished philosophers. Philosopher, huh? Elias rubbed his chin. So he's smart. Exceptionally. Good. Then he won't mind a little unpredictability. The Excelthians exchanged a glance. It was the closest thing they had to an expression of uncertainty. Elias pressed his thumb against the contract, sealing the agreement. A mechanical voice chimed, confirming his participation. Minutes later, he was led into a sleek, white laboratory. At the center of the room stood a reclining chair, surrounded by floating holographic monitors displaying streams of alien symbols. Across from it was an identical chair, already occupied by Varzik. The Excelthian's tall, thin frame was perfectly still, his hands resting neatly on the armrests. A silver neural interface circled his elongated head. Elias took his seat. A scientist approached, fastening a similar device around his skull. You may experience temporary disorientation, she warned. He grinned. Wouldn't be the first time. A low hum filled the air. The lights dimmed. The world around him blurred, then vanished. Elias felt a sudden pull, as if his mind was being stretched across an invisible thread. Colors, sounds, and sensations collided in a chaotic whirlpool before abruptly settling into perfect silence. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the laboratory. He was inside Varzik's mind. Elias blinked, his senses adjusting to the new environment. The mental landscape was unlike anything he had ever imagined. There was no warmth, no color, just endless stretches of cold, metallic surfaces. The ground beneath him wasn't really ground. It was a smooth, reflective plane that seemed to ripple with each step he took. In the distance, tall spires of shimmering data stood like towers, their edges sharp and precise. He took a step forward, and the entire world shifted. Information flowed around him like liquid, swirling in perfect order. The air itself was thick with structured thought, a stream of raw data that he could almost taste. But it was all too ordered, too perfect. There was no chaos, no spontaneity, only precision, efficiency, and logic. A hum echoed through the landscape, and Elias realized it was the sound of Varzik's thoughts. It was like a constant low vibration, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to drive everything in this world. The Excelthian's mind was a machine, a well-oiled, flawless mechanism that had no room for anything unpredictable. Elias frowned. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd imagined that entering an alien mind would be an overwhelming experience, full of strange sights and emotions. But instead, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of control, of complete and utter order. "Hello," Elias called out, his voice almost lost in the silence. There was no response, but he could feel Varzik's presence, like a distant star, cold and distant, watching him with an alien curiosity. Elias took another step forward, pushing deeper into the mind. The further he went, the more the world around him seemed to adapt to his movements. Each thought was met with an immediate calculated reaction, each piece of information neatly filed into place. The entire mental landscape was a maze of perfectly constructed pathways, each leading to another complex concept or idea. It was as if Varzik's mind had been carefully designed like an intricate computer program, with no room for error. Elias' thoughts drifted back to the mission. The Xelthians wanted to understand how the human brain worked, but Elias knew that they wouldn't find what they were looking for in this sterile, emotionless world. He needed to shake things up. He needed to introduce something chaotic, something they couldn't predict. He had to prove that the human mind wasn't bound by cold logic. It was something far more complex. He smiled, the challenge ahead of him clear. "Let's see how you handle a little creativity," he muttered under his breath. And with that, he began to focus. The first thing he tried was simple, a joke, a ridiculous one. He visualized a mental image of a Xelthian slipping on a banana peel. It was silly, illogical, and utterly absurd. But he held on to the image, letting it grow in the sterile landscape of Varzik's mind. Nothing happened. Elias raised an eyebrow. The image stayed static in the air, its absurdity completely lost on the alien mind. It was as if Varzik's consciousness simply didn't understand the concept of humor. "Okay then," Elias muttered, "let's kick it up a notch." He expanded the scene. The banana peel became a tiny, animated Xelthian, slipping and flailing, while a giant rubber chicken danced in the background. It was completely nonsensical, pure chaos. The absurdity of it was designed to challenge everything the Xelthian mind stood for. This time, there was a ripple. A faint shudder ran through the mental landscape, but Varzik's mind didn't laugh. It didn't even flinch. It merely paused. The data streams around Elias froze, as though waiting for the logic to resolve itself. Elias's smile widened. He had just found the first crack in the armor. Elias stood in the frozen silence of Varzik's mind, staring at the still image of the dancing rubber chicken and the flailing Xelthian. Nothing moved. There was no reaction, no laughter, just a bizarre, almost uncomfortable stillness. Elias had expected the alien mind to reject the absurdity, but this was more than that. The entire landscape seemed to be holding its breath, as if Varzik's consciousness itself was struggling to make sense of what it had just encountered. Elias felt a flicker of satisfaction. The rigidity of the Xelthian mind, its cold logic, was being tested. He had introduced chaos, and it had done exactly what he hoped. It caused an error. He took a deep breath, refocusing. The first attempt hadn't worked the way he wanted, but it wasn't a failure. It was an opening. If he could break through the silence, if he could get Varzik to acknowledge the absurdity, then he might just succeed in his mission. He conjured something else, an image of a Xelthian debating philosophy in a high-stakes council, suddenly being interrupted by an enormous rubber duck floating into the room. It quacked loudly, its beak flapping with comedic absurdity as the Xelthian tried to continue speaking. The duck then began to sing opera, drowning out any sense of order. The scene was designed to be a visual cacophony, overwhelming in its silliness. Still, nothing. Elias frowned. He was getting frustrated now. He pushed harder, exaggerating every aspect of the scene. The rubber duck was joined by a parade of flying pigs, each wearing top hats and monocles. The Xelthian in the debate was flustered, his speech turning into gibberish as he tried to comprehend the nonsensical world Elias had created around him. And then something shifted. At first, it was subtle, just a slight tremor in the edges of the mental landscape. The data streams that had been so rigid and orderly began to pulse erratically, like a broken machine trying to correct itself. The frozen, rigid structures that had made up Varzik's mind began to bend, just a little. Elias felt it too. An undercurrent of change, a crack opening in the mind's perfect facade. Elias leaned forward, his heart racing. "Come on, just a little bit of humor. You can do it," he whispered, half to himself, half to the alien mind that was beginning to waver. Then the first sound broke the silence, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't a logical response either. The mental landscape shimmered, then wobbled, as if Varzik's mind was struggling to understand what was happening. The entire mind seemed to glitch, data scrambling for a moment before everything went still again. Elias wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but he could have sworn he felt a ripple of confusion. There was something new there, something foreign. Varzik's mind, which had been a cold, calculated machine, was now a little off balance. The silence stretched, and then, just as Elias thought he might have to try again, a sound echoed through the mental space. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a coherent thought. It was just a brief, strange noise, a stuttered gasp, almost like a hiccup of sound. Elias froze. The sound grew, almost too rapidly, like a glitch in a program that couldn't fix itself. And then a laugh. It was soft, barely audible at first, just a ripple through the data streams. But it was unmistakable. Elias had triggered the first true reaction. The stoic, emotionless mind of Varzik was laughing. The noise was alien, unfamiliar, and completely unexpected. It wasn't a loud belly laugh, but rather a strange, robotic chuckle that filled the mental landscape like an echo from another dimension. Elias couldn't help himself. He grinned widely, a feeling of triumph sweeping over him. He had done it. He had broken through the impenetrable walls of Varzik's perfect logic. Humor, absurdity, laughter had seeped into the Celthian mind. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The laugh, though brief, echoed through Elias's mind like a sonic boom, rippling the very fabric of Varzik's consciousness. Elias could almost feel the weight of the alien's confusion, like the strange sensation of an idea slipping just beyond grasp. He knew that this was no simple reaction. It was a breach. Varzik's mind had just experienced something completely illogical, something it couldn't immediately categorize. And that was only the beginning. Elias grinned. This is it. The first crack was there, and now he would exploit it. He began crafting more absurd images, each one more nonsensical than the last. He pushed deeper into Varzik's mind, planting each new idea like a seed in alien soil. He started with a simple mental image: a cat wearing a monocle, sitting in a tea room, sipping from an oversized cup. The cat, with its dignified expression, raised one paw and waved it in the air as if to say, "Isn't this a fine day?" To Elias, it was ridiculous, an utter absurdity. To Varzik, it was, well, it wasn't anything. It was just another data point, a piece of information that made no logical sense. Elias focused on the cat, pouring energy into the image, exaggerating its silliness. The monocle fell off and dangled by a string. The cat attempted to sip its tea, but instead of liquid, a stream of bubbles erupted from the cup. The bubbles floated up, spinning in wild patterns before popping in loud comedic bursts. Varzik's mind flickered. The data streams vibrated as if struggling to process the absurdity. But Elias didn't stop. He pushed forward, faster now, mixing up his creations. A floating sandwich wearing sunglasses, a Celthian philosopher standing on one leg while holding a flamingo that was playing a violin. The landscape around Elias warped and twisted. What had been a rigid, orderly world now had hints of something far more chaotic. Structures that once stood firm now wobbled, wavered, and flickered in and out of existence. The data pathways, which had previously been like rivers of pure information, began to sparkle with streaks of color, like a glitching digital world trying to regain control. Elias could feel Varzik's mind trying to push back against the chaos. There were moments of clarity, moments of perfect order when the alien consciousness fought to reassert itself. But then, the madness would return. A giant banana, a car made of marshmallows, a Celthian scientist floating in space while holding an umbrella, desperately trying to stay afloat in the vacuum. And then something incredible happened. The image of the banana slipped back into Varzik's mind. But this time, the banana wasn't just a random object. It had purpose, it had a rhythm. The banana peel was now a slippery slope, and that Celthian found himself sliding down it. Varzik's mind trembled. He had no context for the event. It wasn't logical. It wasn't useful. But for the first time, Varzik's consciousness was experiencing something, a sense of surprise, of wonder, of confusion mixed with a bizarre flicker of joy. Elias grinned. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He pushed harder. He wasn't just planting images anymore. He was weaving them into the very core of Varzik's mental fabric. He wanted the alien to feel what humans felt when they laughed, when something so absurd, so ridiculous, suddenly made sense in the most unexpected way. The data streams now began to pulse with an unpredictable rhythm. The once smooth, calculated pathways of Varzik's mind were now flooded with bright flashes of color, like a child's drawing gone wild. A floating sandwich collided with the flamingo. A Celthian floated upside down while holding a saxophone, and a chorus of rubber chickens began singing in the background. The absurdity was no longer isolated. It was taking over. And then Varzik's mind cracked. It wasn't a huge rupture, but it was unmistakable. A ripple of pure emotion. A strange sensation, a force that had never been there before. The alien consciousness was failing to control it. Elias could feel the alien's resistance, but it was weakening. This was no longer about a human mind entering an alien world. This was about the alien world being reshaped by something it had never encountered: chaos. Varzik's mind twisted in ways that defied explanation. For the first time, the Celthian felt something that wasn't logical, wasn't ordered. It was pure nonsense, and it was breaking through every piece of order the alien had built. And then Elias heard it again. The sound. A stuttering, strange sound, almost like a hiccup. But this time, it didn't stop. It kept building, louder, more pronounced. It wasn't just a chuckle anymore. It was laughter. Varzik was laughing. Not a perfect laugh. Not a human laugh. But the first spark of something profoundly human had ignited within an alien mind. Elias couldn't help it. He laughed too. Elias felt a surge of exhilaration as the alien laughter rippled through Varzik's mind. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, like the trembling of a leaf in a breeze. But the longer Elias stayed within the Celthian mind, the more it grew. The crack in Varzik's perfect logic deepened, and what had once been a controlled, predictable mental landscape was now bending, shifting under the weight of the absurdity Elias had introduced. The laughter, though far from human in its tone, was unmistakable. Elias could feel it in his bones, a pulse of unexpected emotion that had no place in the Celthian psyche. It wasn't just a sound. It was a revelation. The Celthian, a species that had never known humor, had just experienced something far beyond mere amusement. For the first time, they had encountered something truly illogical, something that their minds were unable to categorize or dismiss. Elias pushed forward, driving the absurdity deeper into the alien consciousness. He created new images, more bizarre, more random, and more ridiculous. This time, he conjured a scene where Varzik himself was standing in front of a serious council of Celthian philosophers, preparing to deliver a profound speech. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, a massive pie, covered in whipped cream, plummeted from the sky and splattered across his face. Varzik froze, his thoughts spiraling into confusion. The orderly mind that had once processed everything with precision now struggled to interpret this chaotic intrusion. The pie had no purpose. It had no meaning. It wasn't logical. And yet the image of it was so absurd, so wildly out of place, that it triggered something deep within the alien. Elias's grin widened. He wasn't just breaking Varzik's mind anymore. He was reprogramming it. The stoic, logical foundation that had held the Celthian world together was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of pure nonsense. Then, Elias pushed even further. He pushed the boundaries of absurdity to their breaking point. He imagined Varzik standing on one leg, holding a flamingo in one hand, while wearing a tutu made of spaghetti. A crowd of other Xelthians watched, baffled, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. The alien mind trembled. Varzik's data streams were no longer smooth and structured. They were warping, distorting, trying and failing to contain the chaos that Elias had unleashed. It was like watching a dam crack under pressure, the water rushing in uncontrollably. And then it happened. Varzik's mental landscape cracked wide open. The entire structure of his mind splintered, sending waves of disjointed data crashing into one another. The world around Elias became a swirling vortex of color and chaos. For a moment, it felt as though the very fabric of reality was coming apart, torn by the absurdity that had infected it. Elias wasn't sure if he was still within Varzik's mind, or if he had crossed some invisible threshold into a deeper, more unpredictable part of consciousness. He could feel the alien's mind slipping further, as if it was caught in a strange storm of emotions and thoughts that it couldn't control. And then, with a loud mental pop, everything froze. The world went still, as if Varzik's mind had reached its breaking point. The data streams that had once flowed smoothly were now tangled, like threads pulled from a frayed tapestry. The mental landscape was in ruins, with twisted, fragmented shapes floating in midair. It was chaos. Pure, unrestrained chaos. And from within that chaos, Varzik's voice broke through. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a coherent thought. It was a sound, a high-pitched, stuttering noise that vibrated through the shattered remains of the Xelthian mind. But beneath the disjointed noise, there was something unmistakable. It was a laugh. A true, genuine laugh. Varzik had finally cracked. Elias had done it. He had shattered the cold, emotionless shell of the Xelthian mind and replaced it with something wholly new, something unpredictable, something wonderfully human. The alien consciousness, once so proud of its perfection, now trembled with the foreign, uncontrollable force of laughter. It was chaotic. It was illogical. It was beautiful. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had entered an alien mind, and he had left it laughing. Elias was still floating in the fractured remnants of Varzik's mind, surrounded by the chaos he had created. The surreal world around him, once a perfectly ordered, structured realm of thought, was now a fragmented mess. The towering spires of data had crumbled into jagged pieces, swirling in the air like leaves in a storm. The shimmering pathways of information had twisted and blurred, bleeding into one another in erratic patterns. It was as if the very essence of Varzik's consciousness was on the verge of collapse, no longer able to handle the weight of its own disorder. And yet, through the swirling chaos, there was a strange, quiet calm. Elias could feel Varzik's presence in the center of it all, a strange, confused presence that was both powerful and fragile at the same time. It was as if the alien mind had been torn open, its defenses shattered, leaving a raw, exposed version of its consciousness. Varzik's laughter had faded, but its echoes still lingered in the air. The sound had been so out of place in the sterile, emotionless world of the Xelthians that it was now like a foreign virus, infecting everything, reshaping it. Elias couldn't help but smile at the irony. He had come here to study an alien mind, to understand it. And yet, in the end, it was he who had introduced something completely new, something unpredictable. But now, with the laughter fading, Elias realized the full weight of what he had done. This wasn't just a small disruption. He hadn't merely caused a glitch in the Xelthian mind. He had unlocked something deeper. The mind of Varzik had been transformed, not by logic or reason, but by pure, chaotic emotion. A simple human trait, laughter, had become the catalyst for this irreversible change. Elias felt the first stirrings of concern. What would happen to Varzik now? The Xelthian had been a creature of perfect order, and now, Elias had stripped that away. Would Varzik be able to function again? Would his mind ever return to its original state? Or had Elias crossed a line from which there was no return? A voice echoed through the shattered mental landscape. Why? The question was not entirely coherent, but Elias could hear the confusion, the hurt in the alien's tone. Why did you do this? Elias's heart sank. The voice was shaky, not the calm, rational sound of Varzik, but something fragile, broken. The laughter had dissolved, leaving behind a vulnerable mind that was struggling to understand the chaos that had been thrust upon it. Elias hadn't just entered Varzik's mind. He had left a permanent mark. Elias spoke softly, trying to steady himself. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to show you something. Something human, something that doesn't make sense, but is still real. I wanted to show you why we laugh, why we find joy in the absurd. For a long moment, there was silence. The world around Elias was still, the fractured data streams frozen in place. He wasn't sure if Varzik was even processing his words, but he hoped that somewhere, deep inside the alien consciousness, some part of it was beginning to understand. I never knew it could be like this. Varzik's voice was almost a whisper, fragile and uncertain. This feeling, it's beyond logic. It doesn't fit. Elias nodded, though he wasn't sure if Varzik could even see him. That's the point. Sometimes, the best parts of us don't fit. We don't always know why we laugh, or why we cry, or why we do anything. But it's part of being human. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Elias waited, not sure what was coming next. Was the alien mind still broken, still reeling from the overload? Would Varzik ever return to the rational, logical being he once was? Then, slowly, the mental landscape began to shift again. The data streams, once so chaotic and fragmented, began to reform, but this time, they weren't as rigid as before. The structures that had fallen apart were now recombining, but with subtle changes. The pathways that connected ideas seemed more fluid, less linear. There was something new, something organic, that had entered the mix. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And it was alive. Varzik's voice came again, more certain this time. I understand now. I do not know what this is, but it is a part of me now. This laughter, this chaos, it is not wrong. It is simply different. Elias felt a flood of relief wash over him. Despite the uncertainty, despite the fear of what he had unleashed, he had succeeded. Varzik wasn't just restored, he had evolved. The alien mind, once locked in cold, emotionless order, had now tasted something wild and uncontrollable, and it had accepted it. Elias closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had entered the mind of an alien, and in the end, he had left it forever changed. Elias was still floating in the fractured remnants of Varzik's mind, surrounded by the chaos he had created. The surreal world around him, once a perfectly ordered, structured realm of thought, was now a fragmented mess. The towering spires of data had crumbled into jagged pieces, swirling in the air like leaves in a storm. The shimmering pathways of information had twisted and blurred, bleeding into one another in erratic patterns. It was as if the very essence of Varzik's consciousness was on the verge of collapse, no longer able to handle the weight of its own disorder. And yet, through the swirling chaos, there was a strange, quiet calm. Elias could feel Varzik's presence in the center of it all, a strange, confused presence that was both powerful and fragile at the same time. It was as if the alien mind had been torn open, its defenses shattered, leaving a raw, exposed version of its consciousness. Varzik's laughter had faded, but its echo still lingered in the air. The sound had been so out of place in the sterile, emotionless world of the Xelthians that it was now like a foreign virus, infecting everything, reshaping it. Elias couldn't help but smile at the irony. He had come here to study an alien mind, to understand it. And yet, in the end, it was he who had introduced something completely new, something unpredictable. But now, with the laughter fading, Elias realized the full weight of what he had done. This wasn't just a small disruption. He hadn't merely caused a glitch in the Xelthian mind. He had unlocked something deeper. The mind of Varzik had been transformed, not by logic or reason, but by pure, chaotic emotion. A simple human trait, laughter, had become the catalyst for this irreversible change. Elias felt the first stirrings of concern. What would happen to Varzik now? The Xelthian had been a creature of perfect order, and now Elias had stripped that away. Would Varzik be able to function again? Would his mind ever return to its original state? Or had Elias crossed a line from which there was no return? A voice echoed through the shattered mental landscape. Why? The question was not entirely coherent, but Elias could hear the confusion, the hurt in the alien's tone. Why did you do this? Elias's heart sank. The voice was shaky, not the calm, rational sound of Varzik, but something fragile, broken. The laughter had dissolved, leaving behind a vulnerable mind that was struggling to understand the chaos that had been thrust upon it. Elias hadn't just entered Varzik's mind. He had left a permanent mark. Elias spoke softly, trying to steady himself. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to show you something. Something human. Something that doesn't make sense, but is still real. I wanted to show you why we laugh. Why we find joy in the absurd. For a long moment, there was silence. The world around Elias was still, the fractured data streams frozen in place. He wasn't sure if Varzik was even processing his words, but he hoped that somewhere, deep inside the alien consciousness, some part of it was beginning to understand. I never knew it could be like this. Varzik's voice was almost a whisper, fragile and uncertain. This feeling, it's beyond logic. It doesn't fit. Elias nodded, though he wasn't sure if Varzik could even see him. That's the point. Sometimes, the best parts of us don't fit. We don't always know why we laugh, or why we cry, or why we do anything. But it's part of being human. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Elias waited, not sure what was coming next. Was the alien mind still broken, still reeling from the overload? Would Varzik ever return to the rational, logical being he once was? Then, slowly, the mental landscape began to shift again. The data streams, once so chaotic and fragmented, began to reform. But this time, they weren't as rigid as before. The structures that had fallen apart were now recombining, but with subtle changes. The pathways that connected ideas seemed more fluid, less linear. There was something new, something organic, that had entered the mix. It wasn't perfect, but it was different, and it was alive. Varzik's voice came again, more certain this time. I understand now. I do not know what this is, but it is a part of me now. This laughter, this chaos, it is not wrong. It is simply different. Elias felt a flood of relief wash over him. Despite the uncertainty, despite the fear of what he had unleashed, he had succeeded. Varzik wasn't just restored, he had evolved. The alien mind, once locked in cold, emotionless order, had now tasted something wild and uncontrollable. And it had accepted it. Elias closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had entered the mind of an alien, and in the end, he had left it forever changed. The mental landscape was no longer a chaotic storm of data, nor was it the precise, emotionless realm that Elias had first encountered. It had settled into something new, something strange and beautiful. The pathways of Varzik's mind had taken on a more fluid, organic shape, as if they were alive, constantly shifting and evolving. Where once there had been rigid order, now there was a gentle flow of unpredictability. Varzik's consciousness had embraced the chaos, not as a threat, but as a part of who he was. Elias stood at the center of this transformation, the weight of what had just occurred sinking in. What had begun as a simple intrusion into an alien mind had turned into something far more profound. He had forced Varzik to confront the absurdity of existence, the unpredictability of emotion, and in doing so, he had opened a door, one that neither of them could close. The laughter, the chaos, had become part of their shared experience, something that would forever bind them. Varzik's voice came again, this time with a clarity that echoed through the mental space. I see the world differently now. You've shown me a truth I didn't know existed. The words were calm, but there was a deep undertone of something new, an understanding that wasn't there before. I do not know where this path will lead me, but I know I am not alone on it. This feeling, it is not wrong. It is simply part of life. Elias felt a strange warmth spread through him. The alien, once so distant, so unknowable, was now speaking in a way that Elias could almost relate to. Varzik was no longer the cold, calculating being that had first invited him in. He had become something else, something more human. And Elias, in turn, had been changed. I never expected this, Elias replied, his voice soft but steady. I thought I would just be an observer, a student of your mind. But instead, I've learned more than I ever imagined. I've learned what it means to embrace the unpredictable, to find beauty in chaos. Varzik's mental presence seemed to pulse with a new kind of energy, a warmth that Elias had never thought possible from an alien species so focused on logic. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson, Varzik said, that sometimes the most important truths cannot be found in the order of things. They are discovered in the unexpected, in the moments that don't make sense. Elias nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle within him. The journey he had embarked on had been far more than just a mental exploration. It had been a journey of discovery, not just of an alien mind, but of himself. He had seen the beauty in the absurd, and he had witnessed a mind, so alien, so foreign, embrace something deeply human. In the process, he had learned that even the most logical beings could learn to laugh, to feel, and to change. As the mental landscape around him continued to shift, Elias felt the pull to leave. His mission here was complete, but it wasn't a departure filled with uncertainty or fear. Instead, it was a quiet departure, a recognition that something had been set in motion that neither he nor Varzik could undo. The alien mind had changed, and so had he. They had left a mark on one another, indelible, permanent. I will not forget this, Varzik said, as if reading Elias's thoughts. This laughter, this chaos, it will be with me always, and perhaps one day I will share it with others. I will show them what I have learned. Elias smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had entered Varzik's mind to explore, to learn, but he had found something far more important. He had found a connection, a bridge between two very different species, forged in the fires of absurdity. Perhaps one day, Elias said, his voice quiet but filled with hope, they will understand. And maybe, just maybe, the universe will be a little less predictable for all of us. With that, Elias felt himself being pulled from the depths of Varzik's mind, the alien consciousness slowly fading from his perception. As the connection severed, Elias was left with a quiet sense of accomplishment, but also a deep, resonating sense of wonder. He had done more than study an alien mind. He had shown it something that no one had ever dared to before. And in doing so, he had forever altered the course of their shared understanding. Laughter, chaos, unpredictability, they had all become universal truths, ones that would echo in the minds of both humans and Selthians for generations to come. And with that, Elias's journey ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't logic or reason or order. It was the simple, profound absurdity of life itself.